Imagine this. An ordinary waitress staring down the barrel of a gun, her hands steady while everyone else screams. Across the diner, a billionaire secretly watches, stunned by her courage. He doesn't know her name yet, but the decision he's about to make will explode across headlines and change her life forever. What happened next shocked the entire world. Calm in the storm. Screams. Shattering glass. The metallic click of a gun being cocked. That's what broke the quiet rhythm of a Tuesday night at Mason's Diner, a small-town place that smelled of warm coffee, fried chicken, and a hint of grease that clung to the red vinyl booths. The clock above the counter ticked past 9 p.m., and the soft hum of an old jukebox filled the air with the low twang of a country song. It was an ordinary night, the kind of quiet comfort that made people linger after dessert. Tanya Brooks had just placed a steaming plate of pancakes in front of a customer when the door slammed open with a violent crash. Cold air swept in, followed by two masked men, both armed and shouting. The music stopped. Forks froze midair. The smell of syrup was suddenly replaced by fear. "Everybody stay down," one of them yelled, waving his pistol wildly. Most people obeyed immediately, ducking under tables, clutching their children, whispering hurried prayers. A cup of coffee slipped from someone's trembling hand and shattered on the floor. Tanya, 27 years old and running on caffeine and grit after a double shift, stood frozen for only a heartbeat. Her pulse roared in her ears, but she forced herself to breathe. She'd grown up in a house where panic never helped. When her father lost his job, when bills piled up, when everything seemed ready to fall apart, Tanya had learned that someone had to stay calm. Tonight, that someone was her. One of the robbers pointed his gun at her. "You empty the register," he barked. Tanya's throat felt dry, but her voice came out steady. "Okay, honey," she said softly. "Don't hurt nobody. You'll get what you want." Her tone wasn't defiant, it was gentle, almost motherly. She moved slowly toward the counter, careful not to make any sudden movements. The shorter robber's breathing was ragged, his hands shook. They weren't professionals, she realized. They were scared too. And scared people did stupid things. From the corner booth, a man watched quietly, unmoving. Elliot Grant, silver-haired, composed, and dressed simply in a dark jacket, had been nursing a cup of coffee when the chaos began. Few would have guessed he was a billionaire investor, a man used to negotiating billion-dollar deals and controlling the pace of boardrooms. But in this tiny diner he wasn't anyone important. Just another traveler passing through. Still, as he watched Tanya, something inside him shifted. He'd seen plenty of people under pressure. Executives, politicians, investors. But rarely had he seen such calm in a situation like this. Tanya eased open the register. The drawer popped out with a sharp ding that made the gunman flinch. "It's okay," she murmured. "Just bills, see? I'm giving you everything." She stacked the money carefully on the counter. "There's no need for trouble." The taller man snatched the cash, but his partner's attention had shifted. Across the room, a teenage boy had his phone out, filming the scene with shaking hands. "You think this is funny?" the shorter robber shouted, raising his gun toward the boy. The air cracked with tension. Someone screamed. Tanya's instincts took over. She stepped forward, putting herself between the boy and the gun. "Hey, look at me," she said sharply. "Don't point that thing at a kid. You got what you came for. Now go." Her voice cut through the noise like a steady drumbeat. Firm, calm, commanding. The shorter man hesitated, his hands trembling. His partner grabbed his arm. "Let's go," he hissed. Together, they bolted through the door and into the cold night, their footsteps splashing through puddles as sirens began to wail in the distance. For a long moment, no one moved. Then, as if the world exhaled all at once, people began to cry, laugh, and embrace. The tension broke like glass. Tanya leaned against the counter, shaking now that it was over. Her knees felt weak, but she forced a smile when an older woman hugged her. "You saved that boy," someone whispered. "You saved all of us." Elliot Grant approached quietly. Up close, his calmness was striking. He looked at Tanya with a kind of quiet admiration. "You did good," he said softly. She gave a small, tired smile. "Just did what anyone would do." He shook his head. "No. Most people freeze. You didn't." He paid for his untouched coffee and left a tip so large Tanya thought it was a mistake. A folded check slipped beneath the saucer. By the time she realized it wasn't, he was gone. The next morning, the diner was swarming with police, reporters, and curious locals. Everyone wanted to talk to the brave waitress who stood up to armed robbers. That evening, Tanya finally opened the check. Her hands trembled as she read the amount, $250,000. Beneath the signature, A note in neat handwriting read, "For the woman who stayed calm when the world lost its head." The story exploded online. Billionaire rewards waitress who saved diner. Cameras followed Tanya for weeks. But when asked what she planned to do with the money, she surprised everyone. She didn't buy a car or move to the city. Instead, she used it to open a small youth center in her neighborhood, a place where kids could learn about emotional strength, self-control, and kindness. When a reporter asked her why, Tanya smiled and said, "Because fear spreads fast. But so does calm, if someone's brave enough to start it." And somewhere far away, reading about her in the news, Elliot Grant smiled too, grateful that one night in a quiet diner had reminded him what courage truly looked like. The robbery ended in 7 tense minutes. 7 minutes that felt like an eternity, thick with fear, silence, and the sharp smell of gunpowder that lingered even after the masked men fled into the night. Tanya Brooks stood behind the counter, her hands trembling only after the danger had passed. The register drawer hung open, its contents gone, but every customer was safe. The moment the robbers disappeared, Tanya exhaled a shaky breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She looked around the diner, the same Mason's diner that usually buzzed with laughter and chatter on Tuesday nights, now filled with wide-eyed faces and the faint sound of someone crying. "It's over," she whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. The cook, a heavy-set man named Lou, peeked out from the kitchen door, his apron stained with gravy. "You okay, Tanya?" She nodded, forcing a small smile. "I'm fine, Lou. Just fine." She helped him lock the doors, her hands steadying now that the adrenaline was fading. Then she crossed the room to where a young boy was sobbing quietly in his mother's arms. The child had been clutching his chest, where a stuffed bear now lay on the floor. Tanya bent down, picked up the toy and brushed off the dust. "Hey, champ," she said softly, kneeling beside him. "This one's mine. I keep it around for luck." The bear, small, brown, one ear a little lopsided, was something Tanya kept in her apron pocket for the diner owner's son, who always forgot his toys when visiting. She handed it to the boy, smiling through her exhaustion. "Looks like you need it more than I do tonight." The boy hugged the bear tight, his tears slowing. His mother mouthed a silent, "Thank you." Tanya didn't expect praise or gratitude. She was just relieved no one had been hurt. The cash didn't matter. Money could be replaced. People couldn't. When the distant wail of police sirens grew louder, she turned toward the counter and began putting things back in order. Coffee cups were upright. Plates were gathered. It gave her hands something to do, something normal. Across the room at the far booth by the window, a man watched her quietly. Elliot Grant hadn't moved much during the ordeal. He had kept his eyes on Tanya the entire time, impressed by her composure. Even now, in the aftermath, when everyone else looked shaken or angry, she was focused on others, calming, helping, comforting. Elliot had built empires by reading people. He could tell who panicked under pressure, who faked confidence, who led with fear. But this woman, this exhausted, ordinary waitress, had something he rarely saw in boardrooms or ballrooms: grace in chaos. When the police arrived, flashing lights painting the diner in red and blue, Tanya gave her statement in a calm, clear voice. She didn't dramatize or downplay. Just facts. Her hands were folded neatly on the counter as she spoke. Elliot listened from a few feet away, waiting his turn. The officer asked if she'd been scared. Tanya gave a small laugh, the kind that sounded half weary, half amused. "Of course I was scared," she said. "But people are what matters, not money. I just didn't want anyone to get hurt." The word struck Elliot harder than he expected. People are what matters, not money. He'd heard countless speeches about values, ethics, leadership, but none of them hit him like that simple sentence did. It wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't meant for applause. It was truth spoken by someone who meant it. Elliot filled out his own witness statement a few minutes later. When the officer asked for his name, he hesitated. He didn't want to draw attention, didn't want anyone realizing that the quiet man at the corner booth was Elliot Grant, the billionaire investor whose face had been on magazine covers. Still, as he handed the paper back, he leaned toward the officer. "Could you remind me of the waitress's name?" he asked casually. "Tanya Brooks," the officer replied, glancing at his notes. "Lives here in town. Works full-time." Elliot nodded, memorizing it. "She handled herself well tonight." "That's an understatement," the officer said. Outside, rain had begun to fall again, soft and steady. Elliot slipped into his car, the rhythmic tapping on the windshield filling the silence. He should have driven straight to his hotel, but instead he sat there for a long time, staring at the neon glow of Mason's diner reflected in the puddles. He thought about Tanya, how she'd faced down a gun without losing her calm, how she'd comforted a child instead of collapsing herself. There was something profoundly human about her that he couldn't shake. 4 years, Elliot's life had been built on numbers and power, on the constant chase for the next deal, the next acquisition. But tonight, watching a waitress in a small-town diner remind a room full of terrified strangers that kindness mattered more than cash, it made him question everything. Before he finally started the engine, he pulled out his phone and typed her name into a note. Tanya Brooks, Mason's Diner. He didn't know what he would do yet, only that he would do something. People like her deserved to be seen, to be reminded that quiet courage could change lives just as much as fortune ever could. Then, with the rain whispering against the glass, Elliot drove off into the night, carrying with him the echo of her words, the memory of her calm, and the quiet decision that he'd find her again. 3 weeks later, Mason's Diner received an envelope with no return address. It was cream-colored, thick paper, far too elegant for bills or advertisements, and neatly addressed in careful handwriting. To the waitress who kept her cool. Tanya Brooks frowned at it, brushing flour from her apron. She was midway through refilling sugar dispensers when the mailman handed it over. "Fan mail already?" Lou, the cook, joked from behind the counter. She laughed softly. "Yeah, right. Probably another survey from the bank." But when she opened the envelope, her hands stilled. Inside was a folded letter on heavy stationery, embossed with a simple crest she didn't recognize. The message was short, handwritten in clean, deliberate script. "Courage, kindness, and calm under pressure are rare gifts. I'd like to meet and discuss an opportunity. Elliot G." There was also a business card. No company logo, just a phone number in neat black print. Tanya blinked. "Elliot G?" she murmured aloud. "Who?" Then it hit her, the quiet man in the corner booth. Silver hair, steady eyes. The one who'd said she did good. She shook her head. No way. Had to be a prank. Her coworkers thought so too. "Maybe it's one of those TV stunt things," the hostess said. "You call and they tell you you've won a lifetime supply of coffee." Tanya smiled, but part of her couldn't shake the curiosity. Life had gone back to its usual grind. 6 a.m. mornings, aching feet, and long nights counting tips that never stretched far enough. Her old car had started making a worrisome clicking sound, and the mechanic warned the radiator might give out any day. But the letter, its tone, its care, felt different. So 2 days later, after debating it over 3 cups of coffee and a long talk with her mother, Tanya dialed the number. The voice that answered was crisp and polite. "Mr. Grant's office. How may I help you?" "Oh, Tanya Brooks," she said nervously. "I got a letter. I think it's a mistake." "Not a mistake, Miss Brooks," the assistant replied smoothly. "Mr. Grant has been expecting your call. Would you be available for a meeting on Thursday morning?" Tanya's stomach fluttered. Thursday's fine. That's how 2 days later she found herself standing in front of a downtown skyscraper so tall she had to tilt her head to see the top. She felt small, her diner uniform replaced by her one good blouse and a pair of worn heels, but she walked in anyway, clutching the letter in her bag. The receptionist guided her to an elevator lined with mirrors. As it climbed to the 47th floor, Tanya's heart thumped. The doors opened to reveal an office unlike anything she'd ever seen. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, assistants moving briskly through glass corridors, and desks covered in blueprints, laptops, and stacks of papers. And in the center of it all stood Elliot Grant. "Tanya," he said warmly, stepping forward. "I'm glad you came." She stared for a moment before finding her voice. You're him. The guy from the diner." He smiled. "Guilty as charged. Please sit down. I owe you an explanation." She followed him into a private conference room where coffee steamed in porcelain cups that probably cost more than her week's paycheck. "Mr. Grant." "Elliot," he corrected gently. "Elliot," she repeated awkwardly. "I still don't understand why I'm here. I just did what anyone would have done." "Maybe," he said, stirring his coffee. "But most people didn't. You stayed calm. You protected others. You didn't think about yourself or the money. You thought about people." He slid a folder across the table. Inside were sketches, charts, and a heading that read, "Community Cafe Initiative." "I've been developing this for months," Elliot explained. "A network of neighborhood diners and cafes that provide job training, fair wages, and second chances for people trying to rebuild their lives. Veterans, single parents, people who've been overlooked. But I need someone to lead the first one. Someone who understands what community really means." Tanya blinked. "You want me to run it?" Elliot leaned back, smiling. You kept a room full of people safe during an armed robbery. You stayed calm under pressure, showed kindness when you could have frozen. If you can handle that, you can handle a few coffee pots and some spreadsheets. She laughed nervously. I don't have a degree or experience or... You have something better, he said quietly. Heart. And that's what makes people trust you. Everything else we can teach. For a long moment, Tanya just stared at him. Part of her wanted to say no. It sounded impossible. She was just a waitress with bills to pay and a car that barely ran. But another part of her, the same part that had stayed calm in the diner that night, whispered that maybe this was the chance she didn't know she'd been waiting for. Finally, she looked up, eyes wide with wonder. If you're serious about this, I'll do my best. Elliot's smile deepened. I don't doubt that for a second. As she left the building that day, Tanya stepped into the sunlight with the city stretching out before her. The world suddenly felt bigger, and, for the first time in a long while, full of possibility. And somewhere high above, Elliot watched her go, quietly certain that the woman who had once kept her cool in a diner was about to change far more than just her own life. At first, Tanya hesitated. The offer sounded unreal, too big, too generous, too far from the world she knew. She was a waitress, not a manager. She didn't have a college degree, didn't know how to balance ledgers or negotiate suppliers. Her entire adult life had been spent behind a diner counter, memorizing orders and smiling through exhaustion. What did she know about running a business? But Elliot Grant had a way of steadying her doubts. When she told him she wasn't qualified, he simply said, "Then we'll make sure you are." True to his word, he paired her with a mentor, a retired restaurant manager named Carol Simmons, a woman with salt and pepper hair, sharp eyes, and a laugh that could fill a room. Carol had run diners for 40 years and didn't mince words. "Sweetheart," she said on their first day, sliding a thick binder toward Tanya, "this is a balance sheet. It's not as scary as it looks. Just numbers and stories." For months, Tanya studied under Carol's patient guidance. She learned how to read financial statements, order supplies, hire and train staff, handle payroll, and even design a menu that balanced affordability with heart. When she wasn't in training, she shadowed managers at small cafes, taking notes and asking questions until the world of business began to make sense. She worked harder than she ever had in her life. Some nights, she stayed up until dawn drafting ideas for decor, slogans, and community outreach. The project had a name now, Hope Diner. 6 months later, it opened its doors. The building sat on a quiet corner of downtown, a refurbished brick space that used to be an old hardware store. Tanya arrived before sunrise that morning, the air cool and still, the sky painted in streaks of pink and gold. She stood on the sidewalk in a crisp white apron with the cafe's logo stitched over her heart, a steaming cup encircled by the words made with courage. She took a deep breath, steadying the same nerves she'd once calmed in others. Inside, the smell of fresh coffee mingled with pancakes and cinnamon. The walls were painted warm yellow, and framed photos of local families hung near the booths. A shelf near the entrance displayed donated books and children's toys, one of them a small one-eared teddy bear, a quiet symbol of the night that had changed everything. When the ribbon was cut, the first customers trickled in, curious neighbors, former co-workers, and local officials. But soon the crowd grew. Reporters showed up with cameras and microphones, intrigued by the headline. Local waitress partners with Billionaire to open cafe for struggling families. The flashbulbs were blinding, the questions endless. How did this partnership start? What inspired you to do this? How does it feel to go from waitress to owner? Tanya smiled through it all, calm and steady, just as she had been that night in Mason's diner. "We're not just serving coffee," she told them. "We're serving second chances." And she meant it. The diner staff was a mosaic of stories. A young mother rebuilding after divorce, a veteran learning civilian life again, a man who'd been incarcerated and couldn't get hired anywhere else. Tanya made sure every new employee knew they weren't charity, they were part of a family. "Everyone deserves a clean slate," she'd say during training. "We've all been scared or broken or lost. What matters is who we help when we get back up." The first Hope Diner became more than a restaurant, it became a refuge. Elderly locals came in for free coffee and companionship. College students used the back corner for study groups. Kids stopped by after school for the daily kindness cookies, baked fresh by a woman who once lived in her car. Business boomed. Donations poured in. People wanted to help. Within weeks, the diner wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. Through it all, Elliot Grant kept his promise. He visited often but never interfered. Sometimes he'd sit quietly in a corner booth, sipping black coffee and watching Tanya lead her team with the same calm authority that had once kept strangers safe. One afternoon, as she finished greeting customers, she spotted him near the window, smiling. She walked over, wiping her hands on her apron. "You still check up on me, huh?" she teased. "Not checking," he said. "Just admiring." She rolled her eyes playfully. "You built this, Elliot." He shook his head. "No. You did. I just invested in your light." His words hit her deeply. 4 years, Tanya had measured her worth in hours worked and tips earned. But standing there, in her own diner surrounded by laughter and the scent of coffee and hope, she finally saw herself as something more. When the last customers left that night, Tanya locked the doors and turned off the lights. In the reflection of the glass window, she saw the glow of the sign above. "Made with courage." She smiled softly. Because it wasn't just a slogan, it was her story. And somewhere deep down, she knew it was only the beginning. A year later, Hope Diner had become something far greater than anyone expected. What began as a single cafe on a quiet street corner had blossomed into a movement. 3 new locations, each run by people who had once struggled to find steady work. The walls of every diner carried the same motto stitched into the aprons and painted near the entrance: "Made with courage." Every morning, Tanya Brooks arrived early, long before the first customer. She'd unlock the doors, brew the first pot of coffee, and take a quiet moment to breathe in the comforting scent that still reminded her of Mason's Diner, the place where her story had begun. She had grown into her role, though she still refused to be called boss. The staff just called her Tanya, and that was enough. To them, she wasn't just their employer, she was proof that new beginnings were possible. So when Elliot Grant announced a press conference on the diner's 1-year anniversary, Tanya assumed it was about expansion. Maybe he was planning to open new Hope Diners in other cities or announce a corporate partnership. She'd prepared a few polite words of thanks, a warm smile for the cameras. The press room was packed that morning. Reporters, photographers, and city officials all buzzing with anticipation. Flashbulbs reflected off the sleek marble floors. At the front of the room, the Hope Diner banner hung proudly behind the podium. Elliot stood beside her, calm and collected, his familiar silver hair gleaming under the lights. When the room finally settled, he stepped to the microphone. "Good morning, everyone," he began. "A year ago, this project started as an idea, a dream to combine business with compassion. But what it became is something even I didn't foresee." He paused, then turned toward Tanya. "And that's because of her." The cameras clicked furiously. Tanya felt her cheeks flush. "Oh no, this was a team effort," she started to say, but Elliot lifted a hand gently. "Let me finish." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a small leather folder, which he handed to her with a soft smile. "Tanya, you once told me something I've never forgotten," he said, his voice warm. "People are what matters, not money. You've spent this year proving it true. You've built a community that feeds hearts as much as stomachs. And you've shown me that sometimes the best investment isn't in profits, but in people." He nodded toward the folder in her hands. "So now, I'm making an investment in you." Confused, Tanya opened it. Inside were several official-looking pages stamped with legal seals. Her breath caught as she skimmed the words, "Transfer of ownership." Her eyes darted to him. "Elliot, what is this?" He smiled. "It's yours. The entire Hope Diner Foundation. The cafes, the programs, the training centers. Everything. You're the new owner." The room erupted. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed like fireworks. But Tanya just stood there, frozen, her hand pressed to her mouth. "Me?" she managed to whisper. "You're giving it to me?" "I'm not giving you anything," Elliot said gently. "You earned it. You built this. I just helped you light the spark." Tears welled in Tanya's eyes. She didn't care about the cameras or the noise. She stepped forward and hugged him tightly, whispering, "Thank you. For believing in me." Elliot's voice softened as he hugged her back. "No, Tanya. Thank you, for reminding me what belief looks like." The crowd broke into applause. Photographers captured the moment, the billionaire and the waitress, arms around each other, framed by the Hope Diner logo. By that evening, the clip was everywhere, on news broadcasts, social media, and morning talk shows. Headlines flooded the internet. "Billionaire gives away diner chain to waitress who once saved lives." "Grace under fire, how a small-town hero built a legacy of hope." The world couldn't get enough of it. But for Tanya, none of the attention mattered. What mattered was what came after. That afternoon, she returned to the diner, still dazed but glowing. The staff surprised her with a cake shaped like a coffee cup and a banner that read, "Congratulations, boss." She laughed through tears, shaking her head. "You all better not expect me to start wearing suits," she said, and everyone burst into laughter. In the days that followed, reporters kept asking what she planned to do next, with the foundation, with her newfound fame, with her life. Her answer never changed. "The real miracle isn't the money or the name on the paperwork," she said during one interview. "It's that I get to wake up every day and do work that means something, and help other people find dignity in their own stories." When someone asked what she remembered most about the night of the robbery that started it all, Tanya smiled wistfully. "Oh, I remember pouring coffee while someone pointed a gun at me," she said. "But I didn't know the richest man in the room was the one who'd eventually pour blessings into my life." The crowd laughed, but a few people wiped away tears. From that moment on, Tanya Brooks became more than a headline. She became a symbol, a reminder that grace under fire can transform lives, that courage isn't about the absence of fear, but the presence of compassion when fear is loudest. Her name became synonymous with quiet strength. Her diners became sanctuaries across the country. And whenever someone asked her how it all began, Tanya would smile, pour them a cup of coffee and say, "It started with fear, and ended with faith." And that's the incredible story of courage, kindness, and one moment that changed two lives forever. If this story inspired you, smash that like button, hit subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss more true stories that warm your heart and blow your mind. Thanks for watching. Keep believing, keep growing, and remember, ordinary moments can spark extraordinary miracles.